Is it just me, or does it feel like the time that passes between original game releases and their respective remade versions is getting smaller and smaller? I mean, The Last of Us Remake released last year and the original only released in 2013. Not even a decade had passed. It feels like a safer, less riskier approach, but it also feels like it's bordering on a cash-grabbing exercise. Remakes like Tony Hawk's, for example, had over a 20-year gap since the original, while remaining extremely faithful to the original in the process. Then there's the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, again over a 20-year time difference, but these are more reimaginings than remakes, and being so bold with the changes actually worked for Capcom. And we can't just sit here and ignore the enthralling blockbuster 1983 chess classic, Archon the Light and the Dark, which, if you weren't aware, firstly, what rock have you been living under, and secondly, you'll no doubt be sprinting to your PCs to install the simply wonderful 2010 remake Archon Classic. But when it comes to the Mafia remake, 18 years passed between the original Mafia and the remade Mafia Definitive Edition. It mostly remained faithful to the original, other areas maybe a little less so, but with it initially releasing as part of a trilogy where Mafia 2 was given a very lazy once-over remaster and Mafia 3 received the most indistinguishable and imperceivable aesthetic touch-up I've ever seen, publishers 2K were also on the receiving end of money-grabbing accusations.
Hey, you want the money? Is that what you want? You want money, you fucking idiots? Here, take the money! Here, go ahead, take the fucking money, you fucking idiots!
Regardless of what money-centric package this game was wrapped up in to be sold, it can be bought separately for less than $15 or £12 or so on all platforms now, but even when it first released at full price, developers Hangar 13 paid a commendable amount of respect towards the original, while still modernising aspects to today's standards and masterfully remaking one of the most memorable narrative-driven experiences I've ever played. No shortcuts were taken. It's a complete overhaul of the original 2002 Mafia, graphically redesigned from the ground up, new lighting effects, new motion capture animations, as well as new gameplay mechanics that are built on the Mafia 3 Illusion engine, some really impressive performances from new voice actors as well, and a re-recorded orchestral soundtrack that sounds incredible. When it comes to the licensed music, I'm sure you 1930s kids out there were pleased to see that some of these thematical songs with unnecessarily long-winded names like "I'll be glad when you're dead, you rascal you" can be found in the remake, but you must have been equally devastated to discover the toe-tapping banger Louis Jordan and his timpani fives "You run your mouth and I'll run my business" was missing from the remake, so there'll be no rolling deep with the boys in your fully loaded pimped out Schubert 6 while flashing all of your Lincolns at the Broads to this particular tune.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brothers.
I've always enjoyed the driving in Mafia games. It's not quite up there with GTA, in fact it feels totally different, but I still really enjoy the feel of each vehicle. They feel weighty and not very forgiving, but these are 1930 classic vehicles we're talking about. Each car has a much wider range of feedback compared to the original, so the sluggish movements of the larger vehicles compared to the more high-octane vehicles feel more noticeable, tactically predicting an upcoming hairpin or simply blasting your way through the streets of Lost Heaven or successfully slipping through oncoming traffic while unloading a clip on a rival mob or police car. It feels really rewarding. Motorbikes have also been added, thankfully, and this always bugged me that they were missing from the original Mafia games and Mafia 3 as well, so it's a welcome addition to this remake. The immersion of the drive, absorbing the city and abiding by the laws of the road was a huge factor to the original too. I remember getting into school in 2002 to talk with my mates about how unbelievable it was that you can get pulled over for speeding. This quirky little system is honoured in the Definitive Edition too, well, maybe not compared to real life street rules anyway, where being pulled over today will result in the driver requiring to attend a mind-numbingly boring speed awareness course and a few hours of community service alongside the local crackheads, gravediggers and flash-happy playground nudists of this world. God, the 1930s was so much nicer than today. These finer details can be made more or less severe with the typical easy, medium or hard difficulty settings, but there's also the classic mode for lovers of the original where police respond to more of your crimes, there's less UI indicators on the screen, enemies will hit harder, and hitting reload with ammo still in the clip will lose that ammo. If you're familiar with the Mafia 3 mechanics, then you'll recognise a lot of the same mechanics translating into Mafia Definitive Edition, but there are some differences. I don't know why, but the melee feels woeful. It's all over the place, and Mafia 3 wasn't exactly breaking new ground either, but Lincoln's punches feel meaty in Mafia 3, and the takedowns he could perform almost had me sympathising with the guy's skull that he just crushed. But in the Mafia remake, each swing feels lifeless, offering little to no feedback at all. Thankfully, getting into fistfights though is pretty rare occurrence, but it was noticeable and worth of a mention. The gunplay is really fun. Again, it's nothing groundbreaking, it's your basic cover shooter, but the enemy animations provide a lot of the satisfaction when filling them with bullet holes. One factor that stood out though, and again I'm comparing it to Mafia 3 because it's the same engine, was the lack of upgrades. In Mafia 3, Lincoln can unlock varying perks like improved accuracy, increased ammo capacity, or reduced recoil to name a few, whereas in the Mafia remake, you is what you is and you'll stay that way throughout. I felt the differences in shootouts between early game Lincoln versus late game Lincoln, and that sense of progression is missing from the Mafia remake. The base mechanics still feel really tight and responsive thankfully, so it certainly wasn't a deal breaker for me, but newcomers might take a few shootouts to get their eye in, with the wide reticle similar to the Days Gone reticle shrinking and more accurate when standing still, but as a result of that wide reticle, it doesn't guarantee that every shot will hit the target. There's quite a few more limitations to what you can carry as well compared to the original Mafia, so gone are the days of carrying a Tommy gun in your hands, 3 pistols in your jacket pockets, and a shotgun down your pants that you can pass off as your massive mobster member. You're limited to a primary and secondary weapon as well as 2 throwables and a melee weapon, all of which are accessed from a weapon wheel, which has become pretty ubiquitous in third-person shooters nowadays, but still works pretty well. Mechanically that's about it though, driving and shooting, and they're both pretty solid, but it's the narrative for me. That's why you should pick this game up, especially if you've got a soft spot for the Mafia theme on the whole. We take the reins of protagonist Tommy Angelo, whose story starts off being your average Joe taxi driver in the fictional city of Lost Heaven, before becoming entangled in the Mafia web when Sam and Paulie, 2 members of the Salieri Mafia family, need Tommy's help to escape an ambush staged by the opposing Morello family. After successfully evading this ambush, Tommy's introduced to Don Enion Salieri, and it's from this introduction where Tommy's life takes a drastic turn, entering the heated intensity of the Mafia. It's an incredible story, it really is. I do have a soft spot for this particular genre in truth, so maybe I'd rate the plotline a little higher than someone that doesn't, but even so, it's a top level narrative. The writing is assured and inspired, with this genre being very easy to wish-wash all of those Mafia characters' personalities into one, but there's so many standout performances and character variations, and that's just within the Salieri Mafia family, let alone the rest of the cast. The vocal performances are all totally brand new and performed to near perfection, and I love the perspective of which the story is being told too. Similar to Mafia 3, where the story is being told through flashbacks described in a courtroom, in Mafia Definitive Edition, Tommy is telling the story through flashbacks too, but it's across the table from Detective John Norman. Why would be spoiling the story, but it's these small narrative choices that allow for such a well-structured and even better paced story, making such a huge impact on the atmosphere and the storytelling nature throughout the game's entirety. But with such a strong focus being placed on the narrative though, you will feel such a strong sense of linearity pushing you forward with 20 missions to play through just like the original, so there's no taking a breather. To freely explore the city of Lost Heaven, you'll need to quit the game, return to the main menu, and enter the free ride mode from there. You'll have access to the cars you've unlocked, your wardrobe and your weapons, but it's not just a case of simply roaming around and absorbing the sights of the city, which is something worth doing regardless. There's collectibles to find, secrets to hunt down, as well as side activities like the phone booth missions, races to take part in, and taxi missions to complete. I think most people are likely going to disagree with me, but I really don't think this should have been kept as a separate mode. Even though the original game was the same, they obviously chose to keep the main story and free riding separate to pay homage to the original, but I rarely go back to side content after completing the main content of a game. I will do occasionally if the game calls for it, but I usually prefer to take a breather from any main questline in any game and wander off to complete the side content before returning back to the main questline and go from there. I would have preferred to do the exact same thing in the Mafia Remake 2, and I understand this was to remain faithful to the original, but I did feel a little forced through the story, and as good as the story was, there were numerous times I'd spot a part of the world on a mission and fancied coming back to it later on, but having to return to the main menu to do that just put me off. That feeling of being forced through the story was even more evident with every drive having the option to skip it entirely. If you're skipping the drives, I don't know why you're bothering playing this game at all, to be honest. It's a short enough game as it is, clocking in around 15 hours, but anyway, this is just a tiny complaint about the structure in how the game can be played in an otherwise fantastically crafted remake. Performance-wise on PC, I'm playing at 4K with a 3090 and an 11th gen i9 with the settings crunked to the max. There's not too many settings to play around with, but the game looks stunning, even on the lowest settings. It seems 2K and Hangar 13 aren't too keen on pushing any next-gen upgrades for console players though. Mafia 3 wasn't given a next-gen update after cheekily calling it the Definitive Edition, and the same can be said about this Mafia Definitive Edition too. Much closer to the term definitive, but still, 60 FPS for console would see a whole new flock of players playing this game again. I always felt like there was room for some spin-off DLC too, which sadly there isn't, but that feeling of wanting more after finishing the game can only be a good sign of how good the game actually is. Thankfully the franchise won't be dying anytime soon though, with official confirmation of a Mafia 4 in the works. I can't wait for that and to see where they go with the franchise, and the fact it's being built in Unreal Engine 5 as well, this excites me even more. But what do you guys make of Mafia Definitive Edition? Was the remake faithful enough? Do you think free ride mode should have been incorporated into the main mode of the game like I do? Where do you guys think the franchise could go with Mafia 4, with rumours of the game being a prequel to the original Mafia game? That sounds pretty cool. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.